I hope I just gave you a glimpse into why this biodiversity talk is important. Whenever we think of these so-called food chain pyramids or the trophic pyramids, we always have this nice image of a pyramid, where you have the producers, the producers at the bottom there, which is usually a plant. Not usually a plant, it has to be a plant, but it has to be a photosynthesizing unit that is going to convert energy into food, and then you're going to have smaller insects feeding on the plants, larger insects feeding on the smaller insects, birds feeding on them, etc., until you get to the pinnacle. And there are food chains like that have us at the top, us meaning humans. And when you look at it as a trophic pyramid like that, it looks also beautiful, because there are just a few of us at the top there living off all the rest below. But in the midst of population explosions, in the midst of a planet that is going to have to support 7 billion people, the picture is no longer as stable and as reassuring as that one. I like to think of it as Jenga. I don't know how many of you have played Jenga or know what Jenga is. It's a 54-piece game, structural game, where you stack the blocks, all 54 blocks, into 18 stories in a perpendicular formation. And the idea is to keep pulling out blocks, placing them at the top without the entire structure collapsing. And that's how I view our interaction with biodiversity right now. We've started off with these 54 blocks. We cannot add to it. We cannot take away from it. There's a finite amount of material out there on our planet. And what we are doing is interchanging where they fall in the scheme of things and what happens when you move an organism like let's take a snake. If you picture a snake or snakes as a block in a Jenga, you may very well think that snakes are doing anything to support the entire structure. I mean, they're not at the top of the chain, and we don't eat snakes, but as a rule, we tend not to eat snakes. So if snakes come out of the Jenga, who cares? The whole thing isn't going to collapse, or so we think. But then we realize that as we keep fiddling around with these blocks, unless you're a structural engineer and understand compression and tension and what happens when you do anything to a superstructure, an entire chain, an entire arrangement, that is how sensitive biodiversity considerations have become. We have moved to that third Jenga formation on the right, where the thing is so unstable now, because even at the lower levels of the food chain, we have 1 instead of 3 blocks. And the whole thing is tottering there on the edge. And that is where the advocates and the activists get all hot under the collar. Because they are telling us that we are removing blocks that are part of the superstructure, they're part of what is keeping this whole thing intact. And that they fear, just as in Jenga, that we could end up being losers if we pull out the wrong block from this entire superstructure. So I have been trying over the years to convince people to view this whole food pyramid thing as a giant Jenga, where you are limited to those 54 blocks. You have to keep moving them around, because remember, it's not as if you could take over a block and throw it away. When you kill out an entire species, when something goes extinct, all of those molecules, every fiber of their being is being recycled and repositioned somewhere in the food chain. If it's on the top, it's going to help the thing totter. If you're pulling it out from below, then it's going to lose stabilization. So I think that if you consider biodiversity as being a giant Jenga, where a fixed number of blocks, and we keep rearranging the blocks without due consideration to the structural integrity of the whole thing. Andre, sorry. Andre.
Right, morning everyone. On that note, because last week we discussed the issues we had here in
monkeys.
With the sharks. Well, the monkeys and the sharks. Monkeys too, but more recently the sharks. Since we spoke, Wesley, the fishermen have caught maybe about 6 sharks. So you're talking about maybe 6 or 7 sharks in the last week that they would have caught. So it's becoming a field day now for them. Is there a ecological imbalance or consequence for removing all these sharks from the ocean?
Yes, but it's just payback for having removed their food source in the first place, or having forced their food source to migrate. You know, we have moved a Jenga block somewhere. You know, either in terms of, I'm not just trying to cast aspersions on St. Kitts per se, but you know, we would have done some beach restoration, we would have done some mangrove destruction, all of which changed the spawning habits of the bottom layers of Jenga in those mangroves, so that had a spillover effect, so that there were less of these smaller fish that the larger fish would eat, that would eventually end up as shark meat. And now we have to substitute dead chickens.